turn our attention to uranium. Now, the global demand for uranium is increasing as so many nations around the world transition away from fossil fuel-based energy. Now, Australia has a third of the world's uranium reserves. We're in a unique position heading into the future, but we don't supply as much as we potentially could. We have the potential to play a key role in the move to nuclear power, but will our government take advantage of that opportunity? For more on this, I bring in the Australian's Environment Editor, Lloyd. Graham, I read at the weekend, we've got so much uranium. I think it was something like a third of the world's reserves, but we only export and deliver 12% of that to the rest of the countries that are using nuclear power. That seems crazy. Is that because of the politics of uranium?
Yes, good evening, Steve. It's fair to say that the history of politics around the whole nuclear and uranium issue in Australia has never made a lot of sense. We've had bans on the number of mines we can have, the places we can dig it up and places that we can't. We're not allowed to use it ourselves, but we do give it to other people to use. So it's really been caught up in the protest movement of the 1970s and 80s in the nuclear bomb fears, and we haven't got over that. As you point out, Australia has, together with Canada, a dominant position in the supply of uranium in the world, but we don't export nearly as much as we could, and the pressure's coming on because there is a growth in the nuclear industry for power generation, and Russia at this point has a large stranglehold on the supply of those nuclear materials for the power sector. So it's really up to the United States and Europe and other places that are building their nuclear industry to find those supplies so they are not dependent on Russia.
And I presume it's definitely political, Graham, that we don't enrich uranium in this country. We dig uranium out of the ground, tip it onto ships and ship it offshore where it's enriched in places like you mentioned, the United States and also in Europe.
Yes, that's right. There's really a very close control over the use of uranium and the yellow cake material that is refined so it can be used for power generation. The United States was looking at setting up a global scheme, if you like, where they would lease the material when it could be used in power stations to really stop proliferation of the manufacture of highly enriched uranium, which poses a bigger threat outside of the power sector.
On to one of our favourite topics, the nuclear policy, and Peter Dutton's made it pretty clear now, Graham, that he's going down the nuclear road. In an interview at the weekend, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, said, look, every day between now and the election, I'm going to call out Peter Dutton. He says Dutton's got to stop hiding, release his plans for the proposed sites for nuclear reactors, which is a bit of a joke when you consider that we don't yet know where all the wind turbines are going to go and where all of the solar farms are going to go. He says it's too expensive. The CSIRO report, he's quoted it. I think, given a quick look at some of the polls that are currently out, we'll get to those numbers in a sec, Graham, Peter Dutton's probably going to welcome this argument and debate, won't he?
Well, there's been a shift in the sort of climate wars, if you like, between the major parties. In the past, it's been over the existence of climate change and whether we should do anything about it and how much. Now both sides agree to net zero by 2050, and Dutton has said, well, he has an alternate answer, and that's nuclear. So he will welcome the conversation because it will position the coalition in a position it hasn't been before. It's saying it's got an alternate answer to the government. And the decision that voters will have to make is whether they believe that the renewable path is on track, it's going to be possible, what it's going to cost, and what the merits are of choosing a nuclear option if they believe in that.
Well, the Lowy Institute poll, 27% of people said they strongly support nuclear and an additional 34% somewhat support it. My maths is never great, but that's around 61%. So Peter Dutton would take some strength, I would have thought, out of those numbers. And I even saw at the weekend, when you break it down into demographics, Graham, some of the support, surprisingly, comes from younger Australians.
Yeah, well, I think this is a global trend. We're seeing a lot of people who were resistant to nuclear power in the past are giving it another look, and they're doing that on the basis that it is an emissions-free source of power. And so if it is an answer, young people are prepared to have a much closer look at it than perhaps their parents were. That's being reflected in the polls, and both sides of politics will be looking at those polls very closely to see how they can hook into a trend.
Just finally, when you look at the timelines for getting our emissions down and getting the impact of solar and wind up, how far behind is the zealotry Chris Bowen on making his targets? I mean, it seems to me that we're so far behind, it's not funny.
Well, certainly it was never going to happen in a linear fashion, but I think concern is increasing within the industry and within the government that delivering the projects is more difficult than they would have expected or hoped. At some point in time, it becomes not possible to catch up. And I think there's a lot of serious discussions and considerations taking place right now about where we are on that pathway.
Yeah, Graham, great to catch up with you, mate. Thank you very much.